and welcome to healthyhouseplants.com, where we teach you all about gardening in the great indoors. If you'd like to support our show, please use our Amazon affiliate link below. Today I'm going to answer a common question, and that is my houseplant getting too much light or not enough light? So as I talk about in a lot of my videos, especially in the videos on lighting, lighting is critical to plant growth. Without proper lighting, houseplants won't thrive, and they can even experience yellowing leaves and leaf loss. If the plant flowers or fruits, it often won't do so if it's not getting the right amount of light. How much light plants require depends on the type of plant. In general, if the plant flowers and fruits, it will require brighter light, but that isn't always the case. There are some plants like African violets and peace lilies that do flower, but they need medium light, not bright light. So you can't always count on that as your guide. It's better to know the plants and their needs. If your plant seems to be having trouble thriving, it could be it's getting too little or too much light. So I'm going to give you the signs of too little light and the signs of too much light. So that will help you determine if lighting is the problem, and then if so, if it's too much or too little. So the signs of too little light: stretching and reaching for light, leggy, rangy growth. So the plant's tipping one way, and if it starts to lose leaves and it becomes more rangier, and it just becomes more elongated and moving toward a specific area, those are signs of too little light. The plant's trying to get to the light. Sparse growth with long distances between the leaf sets. So this will occur on the Pothos, for instance. So getting here, you can see this has a pretty good, well spaced out leaves here with along the stem there. But if you start to have problems with your Pothos, this can also happen with philodendron, with this heartleaf philodendron. You start to lose leaves along the way, and then you start to have long pieces of stem without anything on it. Then that could be a sign of too little light. Lower foliage loss is also a sign of too little light. So this can occur on things like croton, more upright growers, that where the leaves are forming on the top, but then they start to drop the leaves on the bottom. So plants with one main stem often will do this. What happens is that the available light can only sustain the upper leaves, so the plant has to then throw off the lower leaves. So that's another sign of too little light. Overall loss of vitality. The plant may appear pale, dull, there won't be any flowers, it just doesn't look all that good. That can definitely be a sign of too little light. Pest and disease problems. So pest and disease problems will occur when a plant isn't getting sufficient light because the plant is weakened. Pests and diseases tend to attack plants that aren't getting sufficient light, the plants that are weak and in a weakened state, and plants that are not getting sufficient light are in a weakened state, and they can be attacked by pests and diseases. So if you all of a sudden are starting to have all these pest and disease problems with a plant, it could be that the plant isn't getting enough light. Okay, so signs of too much light. One pretty easy to spot sign is scorched leaves that are browned or bleached, especially on the window side of the plant. And it will often happen in the middle of the leaf. So because if you're seeing leaf edges and leaf tips, a lot of times that's from things like fluoride or chlorine in the water, or too high of salts in the soil, which can come from fertilizer. But if you're seeing spots, and a lot of times they're not going to be perfectly round, but they'll be roundish or oval shaped, and they're brown, and then they darken. They can even become black after a while. And as mentioned, especially on the window side of the plant, then that is very much likely that is scorched leaves, and that is a sign of too much light. Overall yellowing and thickening of new growth. So if you see that starting to occur, that is another sign of too much light. Excessively compact and stunted growth. So the plant just seems to sit there. It's not growing. The plant just kind of like, okay, what are you doing? And it looks very small and stunted and just not like it's doing much. That is another sign of too much light. You would think that the plant would actually maybe grow crazy because of the light, but actually it will shut down somewhat and become more stunted with too much light, because it's just not in its correct lighting. It's basically not in its correct growing conditions. The foliage curling downward. So the foliage, all of a sudden you see your plant with all the foliage curling downward. That is another sign of too much light. Wilting, even though there is adequate moisture in the soil. That is another sign of too much light. The leaves themselves are trying to cycle the water very quickly because they're getting so much light and they just can't keep up. So then what happens is they just curl downwards, or they wilt, and then that happens with the curling downwards, or they wilt. So because they just can't cycle the water fast enough. And then lighter than normal leaves, yellowing leaves, is also a sign of too much light. So if you have too much light, you would want to move the plant away from the light into a dimmer conditions. And then obviously if you have too little light, you would want to move it into higher light or use full spectrum lighting. So that gives you a good overall view of what to look for in terms of lighting to see if your plant is having too much or possibly too little light. Now keep in mind too that some of these symptoms that I mentioned, for instance, yellowing leaves, even the foliage curling downward, leaf loss, etc. Those can also be signs of incorrect watering. So not enough or too much watering, and with too much watering generally comes root rot. So keep that in mind. But if you've determined that it doesn't have to do with your watering, you're pretty sure it has to do with your lighting, then these various symptoms of too little or too much will definitely help you. Thank you for stopping by today. Please leave any comments about any indoor gardening tutorials you'd like to see. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. And please check the bell if you'd like to be notified when new videos are released.